Good morning, seventh graders in Clinton. I hope you're having a great day. I am sorry that you didn't get a video yesterday. I had a migraine and it was not a good day. So I hope you had a good day off from history, and I missed you. Even though I don't get to see you, I feel like when I do these things, I'm talking to you and I'm trying to communicate with you, and I'm pretending that you're there in front of me. Today's lesson is for May the 6th, and this is a special day to me. For me is because on May the 6th is when I realized that I needed a Savior, and I confessed Christ as my personal Savior on this day when I was around your age. I was a long time ago, but yeah, it was 1980, so I was 12 years old, and 12 or 13 is when I got saved. And so it was a special day, and I encourage you, if you've never done that, if you've never trusted in Christ and put your faith in Him and Him alone, then I encourage you to do that, or talk to somebody about that, so they can show you. Today's shout out will go to Wyatt. Wyatt, I don't know if you're watching these videos, but the shout out goes to you, and I hope you and your family are staying healthy and you're doing well, and I miss you. Okay, so we have been talking about the Cold War, but before I begin, let me just tell you the pages that we are going to be discussing today. Pages 357, and we're going to go to 359. We're splitting this section up into two parts, all right? And then, let's see. So, we've been talking about the Cold War. And remember, the Cold War is a political rivalry and conflict of ideas that stopped short of an actual war. Do you remember what countries they involved? The USA, yes, and USSR, or the Soviet Union. So it was basically a war of words, a war of competing against each other, whether it be nuclear weapons, technology, the economy, anything that, it's like that song, anything you can do, I can do better. I don't know if you've ever heard that song, but that's basically the idea of what we had. Now, some of the Cold War crises we talked about, remember we talked about the Berlin blockade, when we had American soldiers and Canadian soldiers, not just American and Canadian, but all these countries come and drop supplies off for the Germans. Then we had the Korean War, where we tried to help South Korea be liberated from the North Koreans, and that war ended in stalemate. No one won. And if you think about it, no one actually really wins a war, because there's so many lives that are lost and things like that. So even though we technically could win, war is still a loss for a lot of people. And then there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Russia had missiles in Cuba. We had missiles in Turkey, and that's how we fixed that. And then the Vietnam War. And we briefly covered the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War lasted 30 years through 5 presidents. And so it was a really tough war. And it's funny, I've been watching this documentary on the Vietnam War, and presidents didn't want to stop the war. First of all, like I said, they didn't want to be the first one to admit that they lost a war, and they were begging to bring the troops back. Even advisors in Vietnam saying these people, the Viet Cong, they're just not, they're not afraid of the American soldiers, and they'll shoot anybody and they don't care. And so, but Kennedy, he wanted to be reelected again. So he thought, if I bring them home and that admits to a loss, I'm not going to be reelected. So a lot of these presidents weren't thinking of others. They were thinking of themselves, or how they could further themselves in their political career. But if you have Netflix and you're bored, I recommend these documentaries. They have one on World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War, which is kind of interesting because they are interviewing people on all sides, North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese and American. Okay, so today we're going to talk about India a little bit and the rise of national movements, nationalist movements in Africa. And our guiding questions today: how important was Indian nationalism during this period, and why did the British partition this region into India and Pakistan? What role did World War II play in the rise of nationalist movements in Africa and Southeast Asia? And how did African and Asian countries achieve independence? So also we're going to talk a little bit about Gandhi today, and passive resistance, and the Third War. And as I said that, I could just picture Clinton and Corbyn using their Indian accent as we talk about this section. And this is called the transition in the third world and Middle East. Okay, so when I talk about the third world, what do you picture when someone says something, oh, a third world country? A lot of times we think poverty, right? It's not necessarily, not all third world countries are in poverty. Many are, but not all of them. And this, when we say the term third world, it's kind of hard to say. Try saying that 5 times quickly. Regions that remained neutral during the Cold War. That's what the that's what it was. And I'm going to show you this picture of India, and you'll see that the orange are the princely states, and then the green are the British control. Okay, so Britain controlled India for a long time. Let me pull up my notes. Here we go. So also, I wanted to talk a little bit more. Let me just go back a little bit because there are some notes that I wrote down about the Third War that I wanted to reiterate. Like I said, they weren't always poor, but many of them were because they lacked freely elected governments or a capitalist environment. And then because of this, there was no check and balances in their government officials from doing what they wanted to do. Remember, check and balances, we have check and balances here. We have the three, the legislative, executive, and judicial in our government, right? So that means that they all have equal power. One can't undo the other. So the president can't make laws. He can suggest laws, but it has to go through Congress. And so they all kind of balance each other out so that no one has more power than the other. But a lot of these third world countries didn't have that. They didn't have the government. So they would get these corrupt leaders, and these corrupt leaders would cause them, to do what the leaders wanted and oppress the people. Okay, eventually the people, because of this, the people had no voice on decisions that were made, and they could not elect those to represent their interests or what they desired. They kind of were stuck with whoever they got. Without the presence of free market economy, the wealthy states stayed wealthy and the poor stayed poor. So, you didn't have a chance to improve. This is where you get the classes and the sects there, S-E-C-T-S. The poor had little opportunity to advance to another class or to rise in their status. But, like in America, a capitalist economy does enable the development of growing middle class, and it provides a balance to the extremes. For example, major poverty versus a very, very, let me see, I lost my notes here, sorry. Oops. So, I'm sorry, I just, my notes went away. So, you have, it provides a balance to the extremes, okay? Poverty to the very, very wealthy. When you, in a capitalist company, if you're very poor, you can work up that status. You don't have to stay poor the rest of your life, right? I'm sorry for that brief thing. Okay, so in a democracy, we talked about democracy. This is what we had. The topic of it is going to spread from other countries during the Cold War. Remember, there's a battle between communism and democracy or capitalism, and we're trying to fight that, okay? If democracy works so well, why does England and France still have colonies, and why can't those colonies be independent and have their own democratic government? This is what they're thinking, okay? And this is going to be the desire of a country called India. So India, I already showed you the picture on the map. The British government had a stronghold on India for a while. You remember in chapter 16, we learned that the British take over, that the British take over India with Queen Victoria. Remember, she was in charge of it. And even though she ruled over England, she allowed the people to have their own voice and their own government. But gradually through the years, Britain started giving India more of its freedom, which is basically what they wanted. They didn't want to have, they didn't want to have somebody ruling over them. Even through this, for many in India, the pace was not fast enough. It was too slow. Come on, just let us have our country back. Okay, so some groups resorted to violence against the British government. Here we go, a lot of fighting, right? But you have a man, and you'll see he's pretty popular. Oop. Gandhi. Okay, Gandhi wanted India's independence. He led a movement known as passive resistance to achieve independence in India. And passive resistance is resistant foreign rule without violent percussions or violent means. Okay, and then so I'll go back to my notes here. So Gandhi was, you've seen pictures of him and you've seen what he's done. He's done sit-ins, he's written to people, so he didn't see violence as a good approach. Can't even talk today. Reproach. He wanted to protest non-violently. I told you that. And so you can do it through strikes. You can do it by refusing to pay taxes. It's showing that they still don't agree, but they're not going to resort into violence. I know that a lot of people are trying to show protesting lately too, especially those that want to be able to not have this quarantine anymore. And if they do it peacefully, they're supposed to do it peacefully, then it should be okay. But there's a lot of things that are happening in America, and it's very crazy, and hopefully that will all work out. But India gained their full independence in 1947. Do you know another person, or can you think of another person that protested as passive resistance as well? Someone we know really, really important to America. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who followed this example of Gandhi on passive resistance. He did sit-ins, he did strikes, he did marches, he did all this stuff without resorting to violence. And I know there were other people that resorted to violence. It's just the individual and how they portray themselves. Gandhi's way really impacted the civil rights movement in the U.S. led by Martin Luther King. So even though India gained their independence, there was going to be turmoil between the two groups. You have your Hindus and you have their Muslims. And so they were, and I'm going to show you another picture of a map. Let's see, where did it go? Oh, here it is. All right, so they had to split it up because these people were fighting. So you have Pakistan, and you have India. They split these countries up, Britain did, so that there wouldn't be violence between, okay? So what happened here? 5,000 people died when fighting didn't stop. Oops, yeah. And millions of people tried to get to their designated homes. So you have the Muslims trying to go to one side, Pakistan, and the Hindus trying to go to India, and it just didn't happen. This just happened. Didn't just happen in India. Just fighting over two different ethnic groups, like causing a civil war. It wasn't just India, it was also in Africa. So in Africa, after World War II, Africa's countries expected to be free from the world powers. And there's some maps in there. I'm not going to show you, no. But over the next 35 years, European nations would be granting independence to African countries. During that time, 125 nations would emerge. And one of the ones we're going to talk about today is Ghana. And I'll show you where Ghana is on the African map. I don't know if your book shows it, but there's Ghana. Okay, and let's see here. So one of the things about Ghana is it was one of the first African nations to gain independence. Britain set up an election for them so the people could vote and run for offices. But in 1951, the Convention of the People's Party won the national election, and Ghana gained their independence on March 6, 1957. Okay? This was also, which was cool, this was also the time that the Korean War was going on. So remember how history connects the dots. Things are happening in history. It's not just one event. A lot of events are happening. And this is an example of the historical timeline. And also another thing that was happening during this time was Sputnik was going up into space. So Ghana gained its independence peacefully, but not many countries did it the same way. We have Zimbabwe, which used to be Southern Rhodesia, and I'll show you where Zimbabwe is. Okay, see where it's in Southern Africa. We're almost done today. It's a lot of countries. So the fighting broke out in 1970 and continued throughout the 70s. So basically that whole decade there was fighting in Zimbabwe. They gained their independence and then they renamed their country Zimbabwe. But progress was made in this country as they gained their independence, but they had a lot of challenges to overcome. Some of the challenges we will talk about with newly independent countries is a shift to socialism. We have corrupt leaders and economic based on a mercantilistic model. Oops, I just changed my setting. See, hold on. Okay. So that was basically what, and socialism, remember socialism, the definition is an economic system in which the government owns the business. Socialism is kind of like what Bernie Sanders wants to do in America. It's one step away from communism, which is kind of scary if you think about it. Okay, so economic structure based on mercantilistic structure. Even though the European countries helped the African colonies build a modern infrastructure buildings, and an economy, they built it to benefit the European countries. So they didn't teach these people how to benefit themselves. This is the first, when I said economic structure, these are the challenges, based on mercantilistic structure. And then so when they pulled out, they stopped all trade network that happened in Africa. And it kind of, you know, hurt them. Of the underfunded system, Europe set up an economy of mercantilism instead of a free market where competition could take place between businesses. And another thing, shift to socialism. That's another challenge. When the government controls so much, it tends to slow the growth of the country. Because people, if they're working for someone else or if they're forced to do something, a lot of times, unless your life is threatened, you're not going to do your best. You don't care about the business because it's not yours. You know, you work for someone and the government's making you do this stuff. You're not going to make the money that you want, and so why give your all? And then the corrupt leaders. This is a big, big thing. You know, if you have a corrupt leader, your country is not going to do well. They make the decisions that would work well for themselves and not for the people of the country. The Soviet Union took advantage of these new territories and thought, hey, good, come on, communism is the way to go. This is what you should do. And the United States would also respond, trying to stop communism. So these little countries are looking to both countries and thinking, what would be better? What can I do to improve our little country? So the big picture today that I want you to take with you is that India gained its independence from Britain in 1947. India has split into two nations, India for the Hindu people and Pakistan for the Muslim population. And then Ghana was the first African nation to achieve independence. And your interesting fact for today, in the 1960s, in the US, CIA spies placed listening devices, on cats. This is funny. So the felines could pick up Soviet conversations from park benches and windowsills. That's funny, cats. So next time you see a cat walking by and they're very sneaky and sly, then you can say, maybe I'm being recorded. So no, not really. Okay, so I hope you have a great day. I miss you guys, and I hope you're making great choices.